Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. My next guest is a neuroscientist and one of the foremost experts in the world of bioethics. He joins us tonight to reflect on the March for Life, but really much broader than that. We're talking about the latest developments in bioethics and some issues that are related to life that perhaps you haven't thought about. He's the Director of Education at the National Catholic Bioethics Center, Father Tad Pacholczyk. Father, welcome back to the show. It's been a while.
Raymond. Yes, it has. Great to be with you
again. It wasn't personal, Father. I want to start with something called conscience coercion we're seeing surrounding so many of these issues of life. What is conscience coercion?
Well, I think it's something that we see as a rising phenomenon, and it involves pressure for people who are pro-life to cave. So, for example, if you're a med student who's studying, there may be pressure in your rotations to at least watch an abortion or maybe otherwise learn the technique. Same for placing of contraceptives. This arises, I think, where we have situations where nurses are actually being asked to participate as well. Now, in the past, they've been able to specify that this is something they don't want to do, and there would generally be an understanding and a willingness to respect that. But now we see that that is changing, and people are saying this is part of health care. This is what we mean by health care, that this has to be incorporated. You have to study it. You have to learn the techniques. And I think that we really have to push back very strongly here and say this is not an example of healthcare. Healthcare doesn't involve actions that are directed against human beings in vulnerable stages of their existence.
What do you say to those who say, wait a minute, this has been legal, this act has been legal for 43 years. It should be made available because it's the law of the land and there are women who want it. And you are blocking their choice and their constitutionally protected choice. You would say what?
I would say that not every law is a just law. And we're clearly in a situation, in a paradigm here where even though it has this long reign, if you will, it doesn't make it into a just law. We had situations in our country where laws said that slavery was reasonable, permissible, to be encouraged. And it took a long time and a lot of a civil war, frankly, before the country came around to say, no, this can't be. We can't even have it in limited conditions. And, you know, I think with abortion, there's the temptation to say, well, let's just carefully restrict it so it's early in the pregnancy. And if we can just limit it there, no late-term abortions, etc., just a little bit of abortion. But again, that's not a coherent approach. Similar to saying we could have a little bit of slavery. No. If the principle itself is right, that we need to outlaw slavery, that we shouldn't have humans in that. Same for abortion. Same logic. We've got to be internally consistent.
Let's talk about euthanasia. We're seeing really a huge push in the name of charity, mercy. Mercy for those who are suffering. And you see it in op-eds. I hear it from my friends and non-friends here on Capitol Hill. And they'll say things like, when a pet is ill, you in mercy put Fido down. Why can't you extend that same thinking to a woman in terrible pain and duress who is suffering needlessly, no quality of life? This is what we hear. You would say what?
Well, it's clear that we cannot treat fellow human beings by the same standard or the same metric that we treat our animals. You know, our animals are not able to do anything with their suffering. We see an animal suffering, and there's a clear element of futility to it. Nothing comes of it, and it's very hard for us to even just watch that, knowing that fact. But as humans, we have that possibility of saying, what am I going to do in the face of this? You know, your doctor approaches you with the needle to give you an injection as a child, and your mom says to you, well, you can handle this, and this is for, you know, a greater good. So same thing with here. We have to respect life, recognize that we are given it as a gift, and we must be good stewards of it until the time that the Lord determines that our time is up. It's not something that we're meant to be masters over.
Let's talk about that case in Texas, Chris Dunn, who obviously in a difficult state, near death. There was a medical committee that was convened to overrule the the wishes of the family. Tell us about that case and the implications.
Yeah, that case was an interesting one. That there's a Texas law that allows for ethics committees in hospitals to evaluate certain very difficult cases when the family appears to be rather intransigent in terms of considering the possibility of discontinuing treatments.
Now, in this case, though,
heroic.
this man, though, was receiving hydration and nutrition artificially.
He was, and he was also on a ventilator.
Aha. What is described for people? It's very important. I've come across so many, even medical professionals say, oh, you know, that Catholic Church, they just want to keep people going forever. They want you on everything. That is really not
That's not the
position.
case. Clearly, we
What
have
is
to
it?
always look at a particular proposed treatment and say, what are the benefits? What are the burdens? And when the benefits are high and the burdens are few, you say, okay, then that's part of my duty to take care of myself. I should use this ventilator. I should take this drug. I should have this surgery.
When does it become extraordinary
When
and therefore
the
outside?
burdens become really high and the benefits are few. So if they're suggesting to you a surgery that's, you know, be long and complicated, long recovery afterwards, small chance that the surgery is going to give you any benefit at all, we would say that's probably heroic. That's probably extraordinary and not morally required of you. It's something you can decline it. And Raymond, it's important to emphasize, when you turn down or decline something that is disproportionate or extraordinary, it's not a sin. You're not committing a sinful act. You're just saying, I recognize here I don't have to do heroics, and God will call me in His time.
But nutrition and hydration are required.
Nutrition and hydration generally will be required, but there will be some circumstances where it will not be required. So for example, maybe you try to feed somebody and all that happens is they vomit over and over. Can't keep it down no matter what you try. Clearly, you're not required to force feed somebody under those kinds of circumstances. All you're doing is torturing, in effect, causing suffering, and not helping them to absorb nutrition.
Let's talk about this case in Missouri. There is a couple warring. They've divorced, and they are warring over their frozen embryos. Now, in vitro fertilization has created so many storehouses, frozen, suspended human life, nascent life, on ice.
Yes, frozen orphanages, I call them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Give us a sense of, first of all, the scope of this, because I don't think people have a real sense of how...
Raymond, what's happening is in every major city in the United States, we have an assembly line production going on of human beings at our fertility clinics. Many of them are not implanted into the mother, and they end up being frozen. So we have probably more than 1 million frozen human beings in the United States, just in the U.S. And that number is ticking up all the time because of this assembly line. There's no regulation. This is the Wild West of infertility. The only criteria here is whether it makes a buck for the entrepreneurs who are pushing
Now,
this.
I've come across a lot of people. Some people say, now, wait a minute. You're supposed to be pro-life, Father Tad. We're trying to have a child. We're spending thousands, $12,000, $15,000, $25,000 an attempt, injecting the mother and implanting several embryos. We're trying to have life. Why are you getting in the way of that?
Well, you see, the real issue here is more complicated. What you can do is you can just focus, oh, we want a baby, so as long as we talk about babies, it must be okay. The reality is more nuanced. You make extra embryos, they end up frozen. Sometimes if you implant multiple embryos, which is what they have to do because these couples aren't fertile, 3 embryos take, they say, oh, time for a selective reduction, where we go in, we end the life of 1 or maybe 2 of the growing children so that the other one that's left over has a better chance of growing. So everyone says IVF is a pro-life kind of a technology. No. What we're actually talking about here is a two-edged sword. And we see the death-dealing edge of that sword when embryos are destroyed or discarded, when there's selective reductions, etc.
Okay, well, now you have what you call frozen orphanages all over the United States. I've also seen this growing movement, snowflake babies, where these embryos are adopted, where they are taken, implanted into the womb of someone else, not necessarily the mother.
That's right.
And this is seen as you're rescuing that life that's been in suspended animation, giving it a chance to live. Morally acceptable or not?
This sounds very pro-life. I think everybody would agree. We're all horrified, really, at the prospect of these embryos being in stasis forever. But the question is not actually a settled one. And, I always remind people, think about it from this point of view. We have all these frozen embryos, and now you're offering this possibility, if it's allowable, which, by the way, the Church has not settled this. It's a debated, open question. I personally don't think it's moral. I have, a lot of reasons that I'm convinced it shouldn't be done by couples. But just think about this. If we were to do it, allow it widespread, what would happen? The companies that are doing IVF will say to themselves, aha, now we have a new category of customer.
A new market.
A new market. Those who will be willing to pay for somebody else's frozen embryos. We have to keep some more stockpiles so that the customer's demands can be met, because the customer is always right in our society. So on the one hand, we're trying to eliminate the problem of the frozen embryos. We're actually feeding into it, I suspect, by sanctioning these types of approaches.
We have 1 quick minute left. We are now seeing, I'm seeing stories of human stem cells being implanted in animals to grow human organs, which will later then be the heart, the lung, retrieved from the animal, implanted into a human being. Is there a moral Rubicon here that science is crossing, or is it not problematic at all?
It depends on the source of the stem cells, but if you get a valid source of stem cells, like adult stem cells or the other ones that you synthesize from our skin, and put those into an animal that you have engineered, for example, not to make its own liver, and now you grow a fully human liver that could be used for transplant. We use animals in a lot of different ways. We eat them, we make clothes out of them. There's not a fundamental moral objection to using them for valid medical purposes and research. So if this technology can be done in a way so that, for example, there's no virus transfer, let's say you're doing this in a pig, you don't want the pig viruses to go into the humans. If all those details can be worked out, potentially a new source for organs.
But you wouldn't want Fido to be the surrogate for a little Raymond or something to keep spare parts for later. That would be a no-no.
It gets a little bit awkward if we start using the household pets.
And Mrs. Arroyo would hunt you down. Thank you, Father Tad. For more on Father Tad's work and all the columns, visit the National Catholic Bioethics Center website at ncbcenter.org.